Hello, good evening, welcome. I'm tibonev and I'll be talking today a little bit about drum writing and drum programming and how to make these drum sounds okay and fine. I hope you hear me okay, seems to be like it. So if anyone has any questions you can drop in the chat below. I'll be trying to be reading them while I go through the points I have written up. So, writing drums. First things first. I'm going to talk a little bit about my process, how I approach arranging drums and writing them. And, well, first of all, I recorded a little groove here. You can see I have these little guitar tracks, 2 guitar tracks and a bass tracks, and we are going to listen to them first without any kind of drums, just to give you a context about how the drums can change the same line being played with the guitars and bass. This is the line. Alright, so we have the 2 guitar tracks playing hard pan and a center bass track. So this is the main riff we're going to be working with. The first thing I like to do is identify what I like to call the pulse of the beat. So when I'm listening to anything like this part here, I like to think about where I want the pulse to be, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So that can be a single straight pulse, or you can do a half time pulse, or you can do a double time pulse. Anyway, the pulse of the beat is what transforms how you hear the groove. I have set 4 little examples here. These are different types of pulse you can apply to the same part, and it will change how we perceive them or how we hear them. By the way, I'm doing this in 134 BPM, if anyone is wondering. Anyway, here's the first part. This is the drums with a straight pulse. This is a 4x4 straight pulse. So as you can see, this is a pretty straightforward beat. Let me open up here, and I think you can see, let me see, yeah, you can see here. If you think the MIDI screen is a little bit too small, I can resize it a bit. Let me do that now so you can see the beat. Okay, that's better, I think. So this is pretty much a kick on the down beat, then 2 kicks, and on the up beats I got the snares, which creates the pulse of the beat. So it's like down, up, down, down, up. So this is pretty much the most straightforward pulse you can give to a track. But the same part can sound completely different if we apply a half-time pulse to it. So let's listen again, but this time with a half-time pulse. So as you can see, this time it feels a little bit lazy, a little bit dragged. It changes how you perceive the same riff. So this is the half-time pulse. As you can see here, I only have 1 snare on the 3rd of the measure, so it goes down and waits a bit for the up. So you can consider the snare here to be the upbeat. So it accents a different type of beat. Instead of accenting the 2 and 4, we only are accenting or elevating the 3/3. So it sounds a bit more lazy. Another alternative to this is what I call combining pulses. So let's add more heads here. So we have the 8 note hats with a half pulse. This is also an alternative you can do to this kind of beat to add a little bit of variety, or if you want to accent a different part. Then we have what I prepare here, and this is called what I like to call the Peter Criss beat, because Peter Criss of Kiss do a lot of these types of beat and accents, and it sounds completely different to the first two, and it sounds like this. As you can see, it sounds a lot more energetic, a lot faster, but it's the same BPM. I'm playing still on 135, and it's the same guitar and bass riff. As you can see, I haven't changed that. So that just keeps showing how you can change the feel of a riff, just changing what notes or what beats you are accenting with your drum parts. I have another beat here. This one I like to call the complex beat. It's a little bit more involved, let's say, and it sounds a little bit different, gives a little bit different flavor to the part, and it sounds a little bit like this. As you can see, this sounds a little bit more involved, a little bit more busier, and it occupies a different space inside the tempo of the song. This is the beat. So it has a lot more kick drums, but it's still only accenting the 2 and the 4th beat with the snare, so it sounds almost straight, but not really, because the kick drums are changing a little bit how we perceive the main beat. Anyway, the first thing I always do is trying to find the correct pulse to the part. So to illustrate, I'm gonna play 2 measures of each pulse here, just to show you how the same part can sound a lot different with just changing the beats. One more time, and here we go. So that's the difference in the pulses you can have. Each pulse has a completely different, bring a completely different feel to the riff. You haven't changed the riff, and it's just a different pulse that you're bringing into. So that's the first part, and that's a lot of what I do on the beginning when I'm arranging drums, is to define the pulse for each part. So I start arranging the track in itself. So I start to think about, okay, this part's gonna be louder, this part's gonna be faster, this part's gonna be just the bass, this part's gonna be no drums, this part's gonna be a lot of crash drums, crash cymbals, I should say. Anyway, this is the part that I like to call arranging, and usually comes before everything else that I do on the drums. So I have 2 parts here, which I usually do is mark them on Reaper. So I go Shift M in Reaper, and I go like, oh, this is melody A, and this is melody B, and then I'm gonna cut into another part of melody A. So it usually brings a guitar or something to let me know that what I'm doing. So I'm just gonna copy this over here and bring another melody A here. For instance, it could be anything, could be a 3rd part, could be melody A, or for instance, sometimes I do solo over melody A. So I have my parts here, then I can easily access them. Let me cut this up and bring this one here too, and I would have the 3 parts like that, and I'm gonna write 3 different drum parts for each one. Let me bring the bass here too, just so we have a complete set of instruments for each part. Bring this one here, and okay, now I have the repetition here. So let's say you're gonna choose a pulse. Let's use the straight pulse for the melody A and maybe half time a melody B or something. But let's start with the straight pulse. Now I have purposely left this all default. I haven't had any velocity variety, anything. This is the straight pulse. Let me isolate the drums. Let me put the mic and the drums. Okay. So this is just a default kit. This is just a Get Good Drums Modern and Massive. I'm running my preset here, but it's just a default sound. So let's say I want to write a part for this melody. First thing I want to do, or I should say the first thing I would do is I would extend this, but I wouldn't copy. So I would drag this, and now I have just one measure of the beat. And I have a long MIDI file that will trigger the entire section, and that will play over the entire section. So now comes the second part, which is trying to think about, okay, I have my pulse, and I know my arrangement. I know I'm gonna be going from this part here, which is a straight pulse, and I'm gonna go from a melody B, which is gonna be a half-time pulse. So I know that already because that's how my arrangement goes, because this part sounds better the half-time. Sounds lazy, more laid back, and that's what I want for this part. I want this to sound different than the first one. Anyway, this is the pulse for the second part. So I have the pulse and I have the arrangement. Now I start to thinking like a drummer. So what that means is I only have two hands and I only have 2 feet. So how can I do, what can I do? So I can hit the snare and the tone at the same time? Yeah, I can. I can hit the tone with my left hand, the high tone, and I can hit the hack tone here, and I can hit the snare with my right hand. Makes sense. Now I want to hit a crash cymbal together with that. That's not something I can do because I only have 2 hands and I can hit a cymbal, a tone, and a snare. So that's the kind of thing I start to think about. How would a real person try to play this part? So let's say this part I want to have a crash, and this crash is on my left side. So I'm probably playing this crash with my left hand or my right hand. Okay, my right hand makes sense because then I just go a small space to the hi-hat, which is here is playing the close hi-hat. So that probably takes care of my right hand. My left hand is going to be playing the snare, so I have my right hand, and my right foot is going to be playing the kick. Sounds simple enough. This is a beat, and lo and behold, sounds something like a drummer can play. So that's the type of groove that I want to do. So let's do another part here, and this is going to be my main groove here. Now we're starting to have to think about velocity. Human beings don't hit the same thing with the same strength every time. This doesn't happen. You have human variation, and this is the pretty thing with drums because it makes the drummer sound like a drummer and not like a drum machine. So let's say I put 4 snares here and they all with the same velocity, so they're gonna sound what you call machine gun effect, which is pretty much the same. Let me isolate the drums quickly. That doesn't sound very natural because a person wouldn't hit that drum like that. Even if you are using both arms to do this kind of snare rolls, you wouldn't have the same, exactly same force applied on each hit. So what I try to think is how I would play this. I would hit the snare with my left hand, then right, then left, right. So left, right, left, right. Let's say I play a strong hit with my left, and my right hand is gonna be a little bit softer than that. But since I want to get a good ending to the roll, this is some the drummers do, they start sloping up into strength. So now, how the same thing sounds in isolation. This is not usually something the drummers do, like that, play this, but this is also humanly possible because I'm using my left foot, my right foot, and both of my hands. So it would sound something like this. But that's not something that would sound too realistic, let's say. But for this point, I will do the beat like that. And now we come into the main pattern beat. This is something that I talk about with some drummers, some friends of mine, people I played in bands, is how they hit the hi-hats. The hi-hats are, in my opinion, the difficult or the most difficult thing to do properly and to do it correctly. And I got conflicting answers. I got drummers that said to me they hit the hat stronger when they're hitting the snare at the same time, and I have drummers said that they try to not do that. They purposely try to avoid hitting the hats and the snare with the same strength. So usually this is a good pattern to go. You have a higher and a softer hat along with, because you are using both hands at the same time. Here in this part you have both hands. Let me mute the guitars and bass quickly. You have both hands at the same time, so usually one is with a lot more strength than the other. So this is what this pattern sounds like. Let me bring this back to level just so you can see the difference playing with the same velocity. It's subtle, but it's there, and you can hear it. It sounds a little bit machine gun like, so you do this to avoid it. You don't have to be precise with the numbers. In fact, this is something that I will go a little bit in depth a little bit after this, but you're gonna do these different numbers. If you hit them, it's okay to have them a little bit different because it sounds a little bit more human. So this pattern now it sounds a little bit better. I usually add a little bit of variation in there. I like to have the fourth a little bit stronger. This is because I like to have the upbeats accent a little bit different, but it varies from riff to riff or with what you're playing too. That makes a big difference. So in this case, let me unmute the guitars and let's hear the two measures together. Now I don't know if you can hear this, but the hat here, it's very machine gun like, and here it's not. So let me fix that quickly. I'm gonna bring this up a little bit and bring this one down a little bit, and I like this crash to be hit a little bit harder, so we're gonna do that now. Yeah, that sounds a lot more natural. I actually like this a little bit higher, this one to be a little bit higher. Yep, that sounds good already. So I'm gonna copy this pattern to fourth and fifth measure, in this case because I have 4 chords, so it's E major, G major, A major, and B major. So E major, G major, A A major, and B major. Now that's the, let's say, a single loop of my riff, so I use those 4 bars as a reference to add something better here. So usually I'm gonna add a fill or something here to the repetition to make sure that the listener has the intention that this is a repetition of the riff. So use the drums as a tool to tell to your listener that this is the repetition of the riff and this is gonna be our bass line for the repetitions in forward. So I'm gonna add a little fill here. I'm just gonna do a simple snare fill, the same way that I just did. Snare fill here, and I'm probably gonna mute this hat because this I'm playing with my right hand and I'm gonna hit the snare with my left, but I'm gonna be using the left hand again on the snare. So I either can delete it and it sounds okay, or I can hit a little bit softer because my brain's preparing, my drummer brains is preparing to go to the snare roll. That works. You can also add an open hat here if you wanted to let it linger longer, like that. And you have a single repetition of the riff. As you can see, sounds okay. I'm gonna add a little bit more strength to that kick because when you hitting the hat open, it usually you hit the kick a little bit louder too because you want to accent this in prepared to the snare roll. Something like that. And it's sounding good already. Then I'm gonna repeat my bass pattern, let's call it like that, my bass line pattern, which is what I'm gonna use for the rest. And then I'm gonna do 1, 2, 3, 4 measures because as we have seen, this riff is a 4 measure loop. And let's see if everything's aligned correctly. And it is. So we have our bass line. Now I'm gonna go and add a crash cymbal here, but since I already used left crash on the first, I don't want to repeat myself too much. So I'm gonna add a right crash here. And now since I'm gonna hit the crash with my right hand, I'm gonna have a lot of momentum coming from that crash cymbal to the snare because I'm using the same hand and the crash is a little bit higher physically. So I'm gonna hit that snare drum a little bit harder. And probably this hat's gonna be a little bit older too because it's an emphasis hit. So you're gonna have this sort of dynamic line. I don't like this here. I did that on purpose. I play that bar differently on the guitars because we're gonna do a little different feel here. Just to accent a different part before coming back to the halftime. So we have what I call perfectly passable drum part here. That's okay, that's a part. Now for this next part I'm gonna do a fill. I wanna do a build-up fill before I do the big hit on 10-1. So usually, and this is probably my favorite type of drum fill, it's when the drummer hits the snare drum with his left hand and the floor tom with the right hand at the same time in a crescendo. And this is what we're gonna do here. So I'm gonna play the snare drum and the floor tone in unison because my drummer is hitting both at the same time. Sounds cool, right? But it could be better. So I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna do an 8th note. sounds okay. Now what I'm gonna do here is no drummer is gonna play this like this. It sounds boring and flat and predictable. And you don't want to be boring, flat, and predictable. You want to be dynamic. You want to use your drums almost like a melodic instrument, in a way. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ramp up this. So I'm gonna go down. There is a shortcut in Reaper to do this, and I don't remember which one it is. I think it's Control Alt something, maybe Control Shift. I don't quite recall it, but anyway, if you select all the notes. Oh yeah, select all the notes, and you do Control Shift, so you can draw the velocity. Now the same feel with a lot of more dynamic and crescendos. As you can see, it brings up this part, it gives it a little bit more life in comparison to what I have before, which was very bland. So let me undo that and compare to this. It's okay-ish, and it's not horrible, but if you do, no. If you select here and you do this, you can bring a little bit like this. It sounds more alive, more dynamic, less predictable, and cooler, in my opinion. Of course, let me just bring this one a little here, a little bit louder. Now that's cool. That's lively, and that's something. That's a drum part that people will be perking their ears when they listen, because we didn't have anything that was close to this kind of this up until this point. Now what I like to do in these types of fill, is to add a little bit of kick drum. So usually a 4 pattern, not too loud, because the drummer rhythms will be focused on the snare and the floor tone, but it drives it a little bit further, like that. And that's brought this part up to life. So now the full riff sounds a lot different than it did before. You can see it sounds, this is already a very good drum part. Now with this 10-to-1 here, my idea here was to do a little build up with a cut. Like that, it works, but I'm probably gonna add a snare flan here. A snare flan is when you hit both the same drum with both hands at the same time, so it has one extra, but that's not a flan, this is a single rate. I'm using, what happens here is that humans don't hit both hands at the same time, so we bring a 64 note into this, and now we have this. This is a proper flam hit. Now I have a snare flam here on my drum library, and as you can see, it's not 2 hits. It is not a single hit. It's a little bit of rap. Depending on the tempo, you can use the pre-recorded flam, or you can create your own flam. Like I said, in this case I use 64 notes. As you can see, the grid down here is 64 notes. And that's 2 hits. Now, they don't happen with the same strength here as well, so it would sound weird. It doesn't sound natural. So I'm bring the first one down and it sounds a little bit better. it brings up more separation between them, or you can do the inverted one, and you can bring the other hand down a little bit, and it also works. I don't have a real preference about this. I usually think about which hand is going to be stronger, which hand is going to be louder. So in this case, I think the second would be a little bit louder because it's coming from the floor tone, because that's it will be the last one, because it has to move from the floor tone to the snare drum, because the left hand is already hitting the snare drum. So that would have more momentum when it hits the head of the snare drum. And that's the drum part. Perfectly working. Let's listen to the whole thing again, because we can go back and fine tune things. So that's your whole drum part, and that's the melody A part that I'm set here. So what can we do to make this drum part more lively? Now, as Ed O'Neilly once said, repetition legitimizes, but too much repetition is boring, and what I have here is too much repetition. The patterns are pretty much the same, apart from the measure 5, where I have the snare roll, and measure 9 when I have the crescendo. What you can do is maybe take this one and add a little snare hit, maybe here, perhaps. Let me bring the quantization to 116, maybe here. That to change the pattern a little bit, to catch the listener's ears a little bit, like, that wasn't supposed to be there. Maybe that can something you can do. You can maybe change a little bit, like add a backbeat. That sounds a little bit too fast for my taste, but something different. Also could use a that sounds okay. Maybe change this snare here, something like that. That also sounds good. That could be one variation of this pattern. So for this variation, for instance, I would probably bring this hat here a lot stronger, and this hat here a lot stronger. Because that's something that a drummer would do, because to play a little bit faster usually comes with a little bit more force, a little bit more strength, and that's something that would be emphasized with this. Now, if you're playing this kind of thing, it kind of catches your ear that this 4.1 here is not hitting as hard as it could hit, right? That's fine, I guess, but it could be better. So you can change this hat to an open hat, for instance. That works because we're not using a crash here. Let me change that to a crash to show you. Now the crash here gives an indication that we had reached a loop or a full playthrough of a riff. This is not right, because our riff is 4 measures long instead of 2. So the hat indicates that we have an accent, we have an emphasis, but we're not really done yet. So that's something that works a little bit like that. That works, that's a part. Now we have the same problem here, because beats 6, 7 and 8 are exactly the same. They don't change. They are kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, do that, do that, do that, do that, do that. That's also a little bit too repetitive, too boring. So what can we do to change it up a little bit? We can maybe add an open hat, we can add more hats, we can add more snare. Let's say we add another hat here. Doesn't need to be too loud, just to give a little bit of variation. That's something. Maybe then I can bring this one a little bit up, because the middle one's gonna be the soft one, and I'm probably gonna hit a little bit harder after that. That works. That's a little bit of variation. Let me up this one a bit because I want to accent the new measure. So that's a very simple variation, but adds a lot of life to a part. I mean, the only thing I did was a little bit soft hat added here and a little bit of stronger here, and the full part now it sounds a lot more like a drummer would play. And that's a part that's simple enough, and it works, and you have a perfectly fine drum part here. Now for the concepts of the next part, let's say the halftime fill. Everything that I just said applied to this part too. So we're going to do exactly the same here. I'm going to drag this up for the entire part, just so I have a single big MIDI file and it's easy to navigate it through. I'm going to copy this as my baseline. Like I said before, this is going to be my baseline fill. Actually, let me change that. Let's just use the ride. We haven't used the ride yet, so we have the ride tip and the ride bell. And if you're trying to play a little bit of realism, you never play both of them because they are parts of the same cymbal, and you can with two hands hit both parts, but one part will choke the other. Choke? I don't know how to pronounce it. It will be cut the next part. So I have the tip and the bell. Now for riding hats, I usually visualize the drummer doing the ride with his right hand, and then he passes and keeps the snare on his left hand. So it's usually, you can hit both parts at the same time, sure. You can hit, like, let me program the same for beats that I had with the hats onto the right, and this is it. And yeah, that sounds like a beat. And the same thing would apply with the strength. You wouldn't hit both or all the hits in the measure with the same strength, so you change the velocity here. That sounds a little bit better. With ride cymbals, and specifically, I like to accent them with a little bit of syncopation. So instead of reaching them right on the grid, I shift them over to the middle or the off-grid part. I don't know the English name for this kind of thing. I believe it's syncopation. And now we have a lot more difference and a lot more interest in our drum. And this is something that you can do, because let me see if I can show both of them. Okay, but let's consider that the drummer is hitting his right foot alternating with his right hand. So let's go foot, hand, and sounds like this. And the left hand just waits to hit the snare, which is probably why this snare should hit harder, because you have a lot of momentum preparation, you have a lot of kinetic energy waiting to be unleashed here, so you can do. That's gonna be our baseline for the halftime part, and we're gonna copy it 4 times. Sounds okay, sounds correct. We're gonna add a little bit of crash cymbal here, so I'm gonna delete this ride bell and I'm gonna change it to a right hand crash. That sounds a little bit better. That's something that is very playable because the right crash and the right cymbal usually are very close physically on the drum set, so you can usually alternate between them without changing anything else in your beat, because a drummer can easily reach both. Now, if you're hearing what I'm hearing a lot more crash cymbals accents on the beginning of each measure on this part, so like that sounds like something would be cool to do, so let me copy the crash here. And here. And one more here. And it sounds a lot more emphasized. But now this right bell is very close and it sounds good, but I don't want to have that on every measure, just let's say every other measure, so it sounds a little bit different. So you have a pattern of A-B patterns of drum. And that's something simple to do. But now I'm thinking, but what if I'm changing those two hits where the drummer has time between the crash and the right to the left one, so I don't hit right crash, right crash, right crash, right crash, because that makes my right ear very imbalanced. The mix is gonna be very right heavy, and the left ear is gonna be like, hey, give me something here, bro. Right, so I'm gonna bring these two down to the left crash. So I'm gonna be left crash, right crash, left crash, and I'm gonna create an interesting drum beat, but a balanced and easier to mix drum beat as well. That works, at least for me. I feel like that's a perfectly valid drum part that I'm gonna select here and copy one instance of my AB and place two instances here and here, and as you can see we're gonna go back to melody A, but I don't think we're gonna have to do that, and I think it's that important to do that. So what we're gonna do now is add life to these parts because it sounds very static. I'm gonna need a fill here on the loop repetition because it's already getting boring to have the same part over and over again. So here I'm gonna add a double time fill to it by simply adding snare kicks, or maybe a snare. That works, it's simple, and a little bit of snare roll here. As you can see, I have a little bit of higher, a little bit softer, a lot softer, and then a lot higher, because these two hits is gonna be probably a right hand. So what that means is that I'm not gonna use this right cymbal here because my hands are occupied, and I don't want to do that. That works. I have the left hand and the right, and then I bring both hands down to the snare, and that's something that's perfectly fine. Seems to works great. I already have a crash cymbal here, that works. Now I'm gonna mute the guitars a little bit because I wanted to emphasize, maybe lock something with the bass here. That's something that is very important. Usually the kick drum and the bass drum are locked in or doing similar things. So as you can see, I have a long hit here. The bass is hitting this note, but I don't have any drums here, and the guitars are just ringing, so I have a lot of space. So I'm gonna add a kick drum here, and it's gonna be a little bit louder, and it's gonna add a little bit of that locked in. And I'm gonna remove this kick here. as you can, I don't know if you can hear this, but these two kick drums here in tandem with the bass, they sound a lot better together than separated, and they add a lot of weight to each other, a lot of weight to each other here. Let's do this one. That sounds good. Let me see if I can isolate this. I'm gonna isolate the bass and the kick drum, kick drum, kick drum. I don't know if you can hear, but here in measure 14, it doesn't sound so heavy. And here it sounds a lot heavier on measure 15 because the bass and the kick drum are locked in. And when you add the guitars back, it sounds heavier and more interesting. Now I'm gonna remove this right cymbal here, and I'm gonna hit the crash with the snare at the same time in order to have a little bit more weight that second, to add a payoff to that bass that we just locked with the kick drum. That sounds good, but this right here, it sounds unnatural because of this hit is too close to this one. And it sounds too repetition between these two, just 5 notes. It's not interesting, right? So I'm gonna remove this, and I'm gonna push this one to the left. And that's already a much better part, a much more interesting part, a lively part, and it sounds completely playable, completely natural. I can see a drummer playing this. I know where each hand and which foot's gonna be doing the entire time. I usually air drum a lot when I'm writing drums, or a key drum. In this case I'm just clicking, but I usually do the pulse part with a keyword. That's good, but now we're gonna have to add a little fill here. So I'm gonna remove this, and I'm gonna remove all of this. I'm gonna have an empty measure here because the drummer is gonna have a whole measure for himself. Now, usually when I'm doing fills, I'm trying to think melodically and even a little bit, if possible, try to play the melody or the rhythm of the melody with the drums themselves. So you can do that, but in this case, obviously, there's nothing playing, so the guitar is just ringing. So that leaves the drummer free to do whatever you want to do. If you had a melodic line here, let's say a do-do-do, you're gonna play da-do-do, da-do-do. That's something that would be possible and usually brings everything together. One of my favorite drummers used to do that a lot, Newport of Rush. He used to mimic the rhythmic parts of the bass or the vocals or the keyboards and use the same rhythm to the drums. That's usually something that's good to do. But in this case we don't have that, so I'm going to create a little bit of a basic fill. I'm going to do snare, hack tone, floor tone, and then probably repetitive variation. So let's do snare, rack tone, floor tone. That's something okay. I could add a little bit, maybe a snare here, then a snare and double toms, and maybe another snare. I don't know. Let's hear. That's something that works. It's fine. You have both hands doing the snare, then one of the hands, let's say right, left, right, or left, right, left hand on the rack tom, right hand on the floor tom, then the left hand's doing the snare, the right hand's doing the snare, the left hand's doing the rack tom, the right hand's doing the rack tom, then the right hand is doing the floor tom and the left hand is doing the floor tom, and you bring the left hand back to the snare. That's something completely playable. Any competent drummer can play it. And it sounds okay. Now I'm gonna have to add a little bit of velocity variation to this. Just bring it up a little bit, and it's gonna be a little bit lower. This one's gonna be longer. This is gonna be louder. A little bit lower, and here it's gonna go low on the first, high on the second, high on the first, low on the second, and a little bit high. You could add maybe a flam here if you want, like on this last note, and it would also probably work because you had plenty of time between this beat and this beat to the drummer to bring both hands. But in this case, I think a single note, single hand hit would probably hit a little bit better. So it sounds like this. And we have the drum part for melody B together. And it's all fine and dandy, it works. Now you can hear the whole piece together, the whole melody A into melody B and back into melody A. Okay, so I have both parts and they're working okay together. Now, I don't know about you guys, but in this part here, after the crescendo and after the flam, I felt that it dropped too much. That's too much silence. So I'm thinking what a drummer would do. A drummer would probably count this to the rest of the band, and how it would count. Probably maybe hit the sticks, but I don't have a sample of drumsticks being hit. So the next thing, okay, to probably count with the head, maybe the pedal, the head pedal. So I'm gonna add a little bit of head pedal here, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of variation on the velocity as usual, and listen to it again. And now you have filled the space with a little bit of drummer counting. I mean, you usually see drummers doing that, even when their foot are off the head pedal. They keep hitting it like a metronome to keep time, and know when to come back in this case and everything, and to guide the bandmates. So this is something completely normal and something that helps a lot, these kinds of measures. And gives you a little bit of anticipation for what's coming, because you know that it's counting to something. And it's doing this kind of stuff, of course, completely subjective. You can do it or you cannot do it. It really depends on the mood we're trying to evoke. So you can do either the silence, or you can do another thing. You can add a feel. You can do a lot of stuff here, and everything will work. Oh, in this arrangement, I chose to think about this would work. Anyway. Now for the next part, I'm going to create a part from scratch here, just very fast. I'm going to repeat this, and I'm going to do just a little bit to add variation to the part. I'm going to do 4 on the floor with 16th notes on the hats. I'm going to use a tight hat because it's faster, and I'm going to select the 4 of them, select 4 of them, bring it over to turn a little bit down, select 4 of them, bring it over, turn a little bit down, and select 4 of them, bring it over, and turn a little bit up. So you have different types of hits. Now what I've done here is to do a 16th note hat pattern. This is played with both hands, so the drummer is using both of his hands on the hat, which is why it's so uneven, the velocities, because each hand is doing something fast and different. And that's also why I don't add a snare, let's say here, instead of the kicks. I add a snare. Sorry, not like that for it's up. Oh shit, this one was selected. It wasn't supposed to be. Okay. So now this sounds a little bit different, but it doesn't sound too natural because both hands of the drummer are too busy to hit the snare like that. One of the things you can do is remove these hats here. This is a very common pattern where the drummer is using his right hand on the hat and on the snare. So you remove the right hand from the hat and you hit the snare with the right hand. This works. But also you can just bring this up here and bring this down here. This adds a little bit more variation, and as usual let's open this up here and let's drag this up for the next part. Now I'm gonna do 4 of these, and then I'm gonna do 4 with the snare like I just showed you. Let me select everything, copy, paste, paste, paste. So we have and that works, but it's also not too much natural because it's always the same hi-hat sample here. So you can do is add a little bit more variation on the velocity and add a little bit of hands on notes. This doesn't need to be precisely, it helps. To do a little crescendo here near the end because the drummer is getting excited and his excitement level is rising, and so he's hitting a little bit higher. That helps. As you can hear, this sounds a lot more natural because it adds that human element, that variation. One of the things that I like to do, but this is something that not all drum libraries can do in this case, is that since we have here 3 types of closed hat, we have the tight, the closed, and the loose. You can add a little bit of variation by adding one of the other types here. And it sounds like the drummer is about to open up the hat, but it doesn't open up the hat because he's bouncing, he's pumping, he's excited. So yeah, that unwanted, let's say like that, variation on his foot. So that's something that works, and I'm like, that sounds. And now I'm gonna copy one of these, and we're gonna do the little 16 hats with the snare that I showed you. So that, and remove that, and remove that, and I'm gonna remove pretty much this because I'm gonna hit a crash here. And I can do a very strong hat here. And that works. Now I'm gonna remove this and remove this and add snare here and another snare here and have this. Now I'm gonna copy all of this and paste paste it 3 times. Do we have an extra something here? Let's hear. So let's hear this whole part. That sounds okay, but for this last measure I don't want that. Oh, sorry. Just want to delete the last measure here. Like that. And I want something different. I'm gonna add what I like to call, like I said, a Peter Criss type of beat, where you change the snare and the kick out of place. That works for me. I'm gonna open this up a little bit here. I'm gonna need another measure here. Like that. Another measure just to make it easier. Now for this beat, I'm gonna do something that Peter Criss always did, which is open the hands and only hit it with the snare. So he's using his left hand on the snare and his right hand on the hat. And that's perfectly fine. And I'm gonna add another kick here, and now I'm gonna do both crashes. Left and right, because I'm using both hands, one on each crash cymbal to end the song, and it sounds like this. That's very bland, but perfectly fine. Now here, I'm gonna change the accents to the downbeat on the hat instead of the upbeat, because I'm hitting the snare and the hat together, and both of them will be locked in, and I'm gonna accent the downbeat because I reversed the beat. That works perfectly fine. You could also use, if you're playing metal especially, you can change this to the China symbol, the China here, and it sounds epic, usually to play the China in unison with the snare. And since I already had the velocity variety here, and I'm playing single-handed this time because the China is usually on the right side, and the drummer is usually playing with this right hand. So that sounds natural to play. And we can end the song there. And we have a full loop with the song. And we have a full loop. And the entire song now plays. And you can hear the entire song now. And we're gonna to the last part is adding ghost notes and doing the little timing and velocity variations. There you have it. We created in a little bit of over an hour a full drum line, and that is a line that works and you can play it and it's perfectly fine, and most people will be okay with that. Now we can go back to this and we can add a lot more of ghost notes. What are ghost notes? Ghost notes are when the drummer, the stick hits the drum head and it kind of bounces a little bit, hitting it more than once. These are very soft hits, and they can add a lot to the beat. So for instance here we can add a little bit of soft, like that. And this beat will sound this. Now let me solo the drums here so I can show you the difference. It almost sounds like a little bit of a snare roll, but it's very soft and very hard to hear in a full mix. But it makes such a big difference, this little detail. Now this one, and this one, add a little bit of velocity here, maybe here a little bit. Another one here, maybe two of them. This hit now, and here another three. Maybe this one is going to be a little bit louder this time. And now this pattern sounds a lot more alive. And it's something that I don't know if the nuance of this is coming across. I hope it is. Sorry, I hope it is, and it makes a lot of difference to how you perceive the sound in the mix. Let me solo this and play the first 4 bars, and you can compare it to the next 4 bars. So as you can hear, this first bars with the ghost notes, they add a lot of nuance, they add a lot of depth, and they sit underneath everything. They don't get in the way of the mix, they don't get in the way of the beat. You can still see it has the same pulse, we haven't changed the pulse, but it adds a little bit of a human element, a little bit of randomness, a little bit of variation. Usually if you are playing softer styles of music, if you are playing slow rock or playing jazz, if you're playing anything that's not completely balls out metal, you can use the ghost notes a lot. They usually don't happen with the cymbals in general, so no heads, no crashes, because the metal surface is not bounced here like the drum head is. So that's something that you can play with. Let's say you can add to a certain part and not to another, like I did here with the first 4 bars and then the next 3 bars here, 3 measures, because this sounds a lot more heavier, focused and metal-like, in my opinion. And this sounds a lot more complex, maybe work better in a soft rock or a blues or a jazz context. But when you throw this with the guitars and bass in the mix, it kind of disappears, but not really. It's there, and if you are listening for it, you can hear. If you aren't listening for it, then you can hear. But anyway, let's hear the first melody with the ghost notes and defaults, and let's hear the difference. So as you can hear, the ghost notes adds a little bit of variation, and direct hits, it's a lot more direct, it's a lot more straightforward, it's a lot more in your face. Like the snare is a lot more punchier in this way than this. And they are playing similar lines with similar velocities, so it's just the fact that you added the ghost notes, which is something that not most, but a lot of drummers do. They simply let the stick bounce a little bit before grabbing them strongly again. And that's how I usually write parts. I try to add a lot more variety to them, so you can have this more randomized or human-like part in order to achieve that. Because no drummer is, most drummers aren't as perfect and you can hit every note with the exact same velocity, and this is something that happens a lot, and this helps avoiding that part. And I think that's mostly it. I mean, we have written a song, the drums part for this particular chord progression here. We have chosen our pose, we made our beats, we did our little fills, our accents, and then we went back and tried to, I'm listening to this or that. And usually you have to listen, or I have, of course, to listen to a part a lot of times to get, I want to accent this, or I want to accent that, I want this part to hit harder, I want this snare to have a crash, or I want that kick to have a crash, whatever. It really depends on what we're working with. If you're playing against a VGM, say we're arranging a VGM, I usually don't use anything from the original drums, or try not to. I usually copy the pulse a little bit, but I write everything myself. I think that helps add a little bit of myself in the arrangement, and I think that helps when you're trying to make something a little bit more yours. I usually try to think like what a drummer would play. That's the main thing, and this is what I have here. It's what a drummer would play. Well, this is what a drummer would play. The drummer would play something like this, something that looks maybe a little bit like this. Like, for instance, these two heads probably wouldn't have the exact same velocity, but since this drum library has round robins, which allows me to hit the same notes twice or 3 times and have trigger different samples, it doesn't sound as machine gun-like. You can get away with a lot nowadays with the more modern libraries like Slate or DGD or Superior, because they have a lot of round robins and they have a lot of variation and humanization artifacts in them. With a more simple library, probably wouldn't be like that. For instance, let me hit this 3 or 4 times. I don't know if you can hear, but not the same sample is being triggered every time. Sometimes different samples are being triggered. But anyways, I think that covers about how I approach this sort of drum writing, and how would I write something quickly for something if this was a track that I would be doing for DOD or Pixel Mixers or something. I'd probably do a lot more passes on it. I would listen. And then I would probably be air drumming to it and thinking, okay, this, that, is it boring? Is it too repetitive? It's not repetitive enough. Do I have a pattern going on? Is it driving the song forward? Is doing what I wanted to do in terms of feel? Does it capture the right pulse? Does it capture the right direction? Does it add the right motion? So I usually listen to it a lot and tweak a little bit here and there along the way to make sure it matches what I'm hearing in my head. But that's basically it. I mean, we have a full song, we have a perfectly passable drums, we have 3 different parts with very different feels. So the last thing I can show you is Reaper has a humanization effect, which can add randomness to velocity and, more importantly, the timing, because so far we are playing extremely strict to the grid. We are doing perfect hits every time. If I would turn on the metronome, everything would be exactly with the click. while that sounds good, that sounds very sanitized, sounds very clean, it also sounds too computer-like, too machine-like. So Reaper has the option to add a little bit of randomness to the timing and velocity, to add a little bit of humanization. So if you go to View, Humanize, let me see if this is showing. No, this is not showing to you, but it would open this screen. Let me add a new capture here. Window capture. And I want, oh, I don't think it will open. Okay, I can't show you this exact part. Let me mute that. It doesn't show, but I have here the humanized notes, and it's adding a little bit of variation to the notes, and it's just a little bit of timing. Let me see if you can. Okay, I think this will work. Humanize. Okay, as you can see, when I hit humanize, the velocities are a little bit different, and the timing is a little bit, in fact it's 5% of timing bias. I can change a little bit. I can use 0%, and I can bring it to a lot more variation, which would sound obviously off tempo, but you can afford to add a little bit, maybe 3 to 5% in this case, and then my velocity variation is around 40%. In this case it's 38%, but you can have 0%, and you can bring it up, and you can see the movements here. Let me cancel this, show you. I want you to focus on the velocity bars here and on the timing. As you can see, as I move the sliders, things move around. Same with the velocities. I can add a lot of variation or no variation. So I usually try to do that. But this is my very final part of the drums. After everything is written, I have all the stems recorded, I have everything exactly where I want to be. I create a copy of the MIDI take, add a new track, and I copy the MIDI take, and then, because if I want to redo this again, or if I want to everything to be snapped to grid easily, I have the copy there. So now I can add the timing, the velocity, and you can also create new random seeds that you add different variations of the random notes and changing the time accordingly. So you have the humanized part here. Now it sounds a lot more lively, a lot more dynamic, and usually can help you create a more realistic part. Now you can see that this there sounded a lot more muted in relation to the others. You can go and fix it if you want, or you can leave this small mistake there. It sounds like a human take. And let's hear this part again with the full mix. And without the click, because I'm an idiot. So as you can hear, this part now, it sounds pretty much okay to me. I mean, I think this is done. And that's pretty much how I address the drums and how I do it myself for my songs and my parts. Of course, this is just one example, and if you have any questions, you can hit me on Discord, no problem. I'm always available there. This is how I do it, and this is how I think it's important to do if you want something that sounds interesting, sounds realistic, and hopefully it can replace a drummer, since not all of us has the space to record a live kit or has the mics and the interface and everything that is needed. I don't think this replaces drummer properly. I like to work with live drums. Fortunately have worked last year with 2 drummers and they did lovely jobs. But yeah, this is how I do it, and I hope this helps a little bit. I hope anyone can learn something here. And like I said, if you have any questions, just hit me up on Discord. I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to share what I have learned. And if anyone has any questions, just shoot me. And that's it, guys. I hope you enjoy spending this hour with me, doing a little bit of drum geeking. And if I should enjoy it, I'm now gonna stop talking and get a cup of tea because my throat is getting very dry. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you had a wonderful day today, or whatever it is you're watching this. I will be dropping this on my YouTube channel shortly. So thank you, good night, good evening, or good day or good morning if you're in another time zone. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching, and catch you on another day. See ya.